this is why Brett and his screw job happened. This is it. It had nothing to do with him being in Canada. It was this comment that Shawn Michaels made when Bret Hart said that in that meeting. He said, I wouldn't mind, I would drop the title to you. And Shawn, told him, well, that's great, but just know that I wouldn't do the same for you. And, Bret was extremely, extremely shocked. What is up, Grocknation? Hope you guys are doing well. I missed you guys. I haven't seen you guys in almost 20 days. It's not that I didn't want to. I've just been grinding the finals for the last 20 days on my spare time on my computer. Oh my god, let me tell you. You want to talk about 2 steps forward, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That's solo queue ranked experience. That's the finals right there. Holy crap, I'm still 3 ranks off and I only got 14 days left. And I want to play Ark so badly full time. Guys, it's a great game. But regardless, I'm getting up, or staying up for nights tonight. And, let me just put my wedding ring on here. There we go. And I decided, I actually just seen this not that long ago on a channel. A young lady is just started an ASMR channel, and she was talking about the Montreal Screwjob, and she didn't know what she was talking about because she was just reading articles. And I thought to myself, there's so many misconceptions and things when it comes to Montreal Screwjob and Bret Hart's intentions in that. And I was like, man, you know what'd be really great? If I did a video from a fan's perspective that actually watched all of that happen live, including the pay-per-view, then we can talk about that, because it was a very, 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 very significant event in sports entertainment, or in a sports world. Anyone involved in sports to this day, if you mention to them the Montreal Screwjob, even if they don't watch professional wrestling, or they never did, they know what you're talking about. It's a huge part of pop culture, and it literally shaped the wrestling you see on TV today. Had the Montreal Screwjob not happened, there's a very good chance wrestling would not be what it is today, if it was even around today. That the level it's at is debatable, but we'll get into that as well. We're going to dig deep into both of these men's careers. Talk about their matches, their personal animosities together, as well as how they are today. They're very friendly today, by the way. Even though Mr. Hitman here just recently, last week, did an interview where he basically accused Shawn of sleeping with Vince McMahon. So I'm glad I didn't do this video last week. I was going to do it last week, and I decided to wait because I was on days, and the only time I could do it was after work, and I'm so tired. And I'm glad I didn't do it now, because that's a new development in this whole story. It's just funny that it's about the very video I'm going to make for you guys. So yeah, that's going to be added to that as well. If you're looking at me and going, you look like a goddamn werewolf, Grockstar, cut your nails, I actually started cutting them tonight. My finger actually really healed up. If you guys can see how that hangnail, that was brutal. This is the only other reason why I didn't put out the other Maxim video yet, because it was so disgusting and dry skin and dry blood and everything. I was like, that looks so gross. I'll be embarrassed for people to see that on my video, so I don't want to do that. Those are really easy videos to make. I'm going to have one out for you guys in a couple days here. But yeah, it's the reason why those haven't been coming out. Of course, I would get a finger infection when I got all those magazines in. But guys, with that being said, let's dig into this. And again, if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of content, or you like ASMR in general and like really cool looking arcades, I mean, look at this. We got, our Billy Bob Bad Santa up for this season. We have Christmas lights on our signed Hitman singlet. This is a cool looking channel, I'm sorry, and the content is top notch. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and if you like this video, give it that thumbs up. With that being said, guys, let's dig into this story. Let's go. Okay, so to start this story between these two gentlemen, we're going to go over both gentlemen's profiles first, and then how they come head to head, because they're very, very parallel characters in the wrestling world and in wrestling lore as well. I forgot to mention, if I didn't already, I didn't cut my nails because I want to do some tapping. I got my omnidirectional setting on my Blue Yeti right now. Hopefully you guys won't pick up my PC running behind you. But yeah, we're going to talk about both these guys and how they arguably are the biggest entertainers of the 90s in professional wrestling on both shows that were going on at the time. So we're going to start with Mr. Hitman Bret Hart, the excellence of execution. Bret Hart comes from a huge lineage of wrestlers. The Hart family out of Calgary, Stu being the patriarch, they have wrestlers in the industry to this day that are at high levels. If I think of the biggest right now, it's probably Natalya Neidhart. Who's actually not with the WWE right now. She's off doing her own thing, retooling her character, I guess. But she's the daughter of Jim Anvil Neidhart, who is the brother-in-law of Bret Hart. He's married to his sister Georgia. There were 12 members in the Hart family, kids, and all of them were involved in wrestling one way or the other. The girls married wrestlers, and the guys became wrestlers or managers or whatever it was, but they were all involved in it. So Bret ended up wrestling for his father's promotion in the 70s and 80s, Stampede Wrestling, out of Calgary. Super ahead of its time wrestling. If you guys are wrestling fans and you watch it, those matches, it's crazy. The moves they were doing in the late 70s, early 80s, it really was a different type of wrestling. Way superior to stuff you would have seen on WWF, AWA, NWA, etc. Technically, NWA was a bunch of territories, including Stampede Wrestling, but it was a very realistic style of wrestling, which he was always plotted for. His realism, his storytelling in wrestling, as they call it. He could tell a really good story in the match, whether it's an injury he's working on or an injury he sustained. He can really tell a story and make you believe that it's real. That's something that's missing from today's product for sure. Now, in 1984, I think it was the end of 83, Vince McMahon's WWF, he recently came into ownership of from buying it from his dad, Vince Sr., was buying up territories, NWA territories, to get their talent and their TV networks, because he wanted to go global with wrestling, which really pissed off all the territory owners, because at the time, wrestling across the United States and North America in general, including Canada, was a bunch of territories. So basically, there was like 50 shows in North America, and you could only watch those shows that are in your local area. So for me, if I was alive and watching TV in the late 70s, early 80s, I was born in the late 80s, so I didn't get a chance to watch Stampede Wrestling. Stampede Wrestling would have been the only show I'd be able to watch on my local television, because I would have been from Alberta. That's the only wrestling I'd be able to watch. I wouldn't be able to watch, Mid-South or any of those huge, bigger promotions with the bigger stars. I would not be able to watch that. So Vince decided, I want to take this global and buy everybody up, and then have coast-to-coast ownership, and have my show on TV for everybody across America. So he bought Bret's father's promotion, Stampede Wrestling. His dad, Stu, was looking to get out of the business anyway, so this was a good opportunity. And in purchasing Stampede Wrestling, he took some of their assets, aka their wrestlers, and Bret was one of them. It was his brother-in-law, Jim Anvil Neidhart, his other brother-in-law, Davey Boy Smith, aka the British Bulldog, and Dynamite Kid, who I think dated a Hart sister, but he never did marry one. I don't think he's blood related to them at all, but he took those 4 wrestlers, and they joined the WWF, now WWE, if you guys are confused. And Bret joined in 1984. He joined, and initially they didn't know what to do with him in the promotion. They had him as a cowboy at one point, all these silly gimmicks, and he was ready to almost quit professional wrestling. Can you imagine if the Hitman quit professional wrestling? And he finally had to talk with Vince, and he's like, why don't you just put me with Jim? Jim Anvil Neidhart was in the same boat. They had no direction for him. He was just a low card And so Vince said, alright, I'll give you guys a shot. So they threw Jimmy Hart with him, and they became the tag team, the Hart Foundation, a heel tag team. That singlet back there is a Hart Foundation singlet. It has Brett's autograph right here, and Jim and Jimmy Hart's. So my favorite piece of memorabilia I own, it's signed memorabilia. I'm super happy with it. Actually, beside me, that's signed as well from Brianna Banks and Jenna Jameson. I got some Rihanna stuff, Katy Perry stuff. What else do I have? I have a Bret Hart signed picture back here as well. Ariane Celeste from a UFC event I went to. I got a bunch of little junk that's signed anyway, guys. But yeah, that's my favorite. This is my favorite thing in my arcade. And I was supposed to put my Christmas tree up this year. And I was like, it'd be really cool if I put just lights on Brett. That would look really cool, and it does. Look at that. You can't beat it. Anyway, back to the story. So, I got cat here in my eye. Sorry, guys. And I'm really trying hard not to have the sniffles because our furnace is on now. Winter is here where I'm from. I think it was minus 16 tonight. And when my furnace comes on, even when we change our filter, I start sniffling like I'm a cocaine addict. You know what I mean? I promise you I'm not. But, so we joined his brother-in-law and Jimmy Hart and became the Hart Foundation. A very good tag team. They were like a Stampede-style wrestling, which was something that was, interesting and new in the world of wrestling, the World Wrestling Federation, but they weren't really getting much attention. Whereas Brett's brother-in-law, Dynamite, or British Bulldog and Dynamite Kid, they were kind of getting a push as this, this cool British team. They actually got the titles before the Hart Foundation did. And it wasn't until Brett and Jim wanted new singlets for a Saturday night's main event. They wanted a new outfit, so they went to the wrestling seamstress at the time. It was some lady, and Brett told the story. And he told her, we want, new singlets, because at the time they would wear red and blue instead of pink. It was always red or blue. And she told him, okay, well, all I have is hot pink. And they were both like, oh, we don't want hot pink. Wrestlers don't wear pink. And she's like, okay, that's all I have, really. So they thought about it for a day, and Brett went back to her and said, okay, give us the hot pink, we'll try that. So at Saturday Night Main Event rehearsals, they do rehearsals before shows, like entrances. They get a feel for the ring. They talk with the other wrestlers about the match they're going to have, etc. There was like a buffet in the back for all the wrestlers, and Vince walked by and seen Brett and Jim with their pink and black gear, and he went around in circles looking at them, and Brett's like, oh, we're going to get fired. He's going to be like, what the fuck are you guys doing wearing pink? But then he said it was the total opposite. Vince was nodding his head, a big smile on his face, and he goes, that's it. That is exactly what you guys have been missing. Don't ever change your colors, he said. And that was it. They were pink from that point on. And he always wore pink and black for the rest of his career. He loves pink. I love pink. I own many pink things. A lot of it is attributed to this, but pink and black just go together. And as Bret Hart said himself, you mix a little bit of red, mix a little bit of white, the Canadian colors, you get pink. So from that point on, they really got pushes, and they got a little more notoriety. Great matches. They got to work WrestleMania 2 in a battle royal, which Bret was really upset about because he was, they were planning on having Bret work with Ricky Dragon Steamboat to have like a technical small man match just to open the show. And the day before, or the day of WrestleMania, they told him, nope, not happening anymore. You're not big enough of a name. We're going to put you in a battle royal. So they're in WrestleMania 2's battle royal, if you watch it. I think they're actually wearing, because this is before they wore pink. They were still wearing blue and black. And Bret's proud of that battle royal because, he talked to Andre the Giant, and he said, how about this? Because Andre was winning it, obviously. He goes, how about we end with you throwing me out of the ring onto Jim? And Andre loved the idea, and that's how the match ended. He picks up Bret and he throws him out of the ring onto Jim Neidhart. They worked WrestleMania 3, I believe, against the Bulldogs, and there was a celebrity working with the Bulldogs, and a celebrity working with the Hart Foundation. It was a 3-on-3 tag team. Bret can't remember that amazing WrestleMania, 93,000 people in a Pontiac Silverdome, because he got a finger in the eye early in a match, and he had blurry vision for the whole time, so unfortunately. And they had really good success. I don't want to just go through his whole career because we'd be here a lot longer than we have to be. But he had a whole lot of success. They won the world titles. They turned face. In wrestling, a heel is a bad guy, a face is a good guy. They turned face, and when Jimmy Hart betrayed them, they joined Demolition. And I think was it Demolition? I can't recall. This a long time ago. But they turned face, became a face tag team. And eventually, in the early 90s, the WWF was under investigation for steroid allegations. So, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, as we'll talk about, were two smaller wrestlers in a land of giants. Vince McMahon, especially in the 80s, he wanted these larger-than-life cartoon-looking characters that were muscles. They couldn't walk through a door kind of deal, and he had an obsession with muscular men, so much so that he started a bodybuilding organization. He wanted to become like the sports entertainment of bodybuilders. It never took off. But those were wrestlers, those were men as far as he was concerned. Bret wasn't a man, Shawn wasn't a man. They were smaller wrestlers. They were never going to be main eventers. Main eventers were giants. The Hulk Hogans, the Hercules Hernandezes, Iron Sheiks, all these wrestlers, Andre the Giants. These giants have to be, they're the only ones people will come to see. Well, when those steroid allegations happened, he had to start slowly, reeling in all of his roid heads, Ultimate Warriors, Bulldogs, Hogans, and start promoting smaller wrestlers to show them that no, we don't have steroid users here, as those other wrestlers were starting to shrink from cycling off these steroids. So around this time, Bret Hart got an opportunity to go singles competition. Now, I always say, one of my first memories as a child actually involves his first taste of singles glory, I guess you could say. And it was at WrestleMania 4 in Atlantic City at Trump Plaza. At a battle royal. He was the last one left with Bad News Brown, someone Bret had worked with in Calgary Stampede when he'd come to the territory back in the day. And they teamed up to take out the last three guys, and it looked like they were going to share the trophy. And right when they were raising their hands together, Bad News betrayed Bret and threw him over the ropes. He hit him with like a kick and threw him over the ropes, won the trophy. And Bret came back into the ring and he destroyed the trophy and got massive cheers. This is a memory, you guys. I'm not shitting you. I remember it like 3 years old. I was watching it in a basement suite apartment in Edmonton. It was an old tube TV on top of a kitchen table because we had no furniture. I guess we just moved there. And I was watching it, probably Primetime Wrestling or Superstars. I was doing a recap. And that's my first memory of wrestling. It's my first memory of Bret Hart, and it's one of my first vivid memories I can always remember. But that's when he first kind of got his first taste of, I think I could make this as a singles. And so they gave him a run as a singles babyface. And it really, really worked out. It accumulated with him winning the 1991 SummerSlam co-main event. He beat Mr. Perfect, an injured Mr. Perfect, for the Intercontinental title. Great match, 5-star match as far as I'm concerned. He would go on to defend that title right up until I think SummerSlam 1992. No, he would lose it. Roddy Piper would get the title. And at WrestleMania 8, I believe it was, am I getting my WrestleMania, or 7? It was the one not in Detroit. Where was WrestleMania 8? WrestleMania 8 was in a dome, I think. Yeah, WrestleMania 8 was in the dome. Where was this? The main event was Savage and Flair. God, I can't remember. But he faced Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper was the champion. They had an amazing match, and he won his title back. And he would hold it until that SummerSlam 1992 in Wembley Stadium. And he would lose it to the British Bulldog, a match that if you ever want to introduce someone to wrestling, it's one of the matches I would say you definitely want to show them. Non-stop excitement, and it's even more insane that the British Bulldog was so doped up on drugs that Bret had to carry the match. And it's insane because the match is so good, and one guy was stoned out of his mind. And this guy was calling the match the whole time because British Bulldog couldn't remember anything. But he lost the title, and he lost the title because they were going to put the world title on him, and that's what would happen. Not long after, he would win his first world title in a non-televised event in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and he became the world champion for the first time. go on to lose that title at WrestleMania 9 in Caesar's Palace. Yes, we were right. It was WrestleMania 8-9 to Yokozuna. And then Yokozuna would lose it a minute later to Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan politicked his way into winning the world title, even though he wasn't even on the card. He came out and saved Bret after they were beating him up after Yoko had already beaten Bret and won the title. And they challenged Hogan on a spot, and Hogan beats him. It was such a stupid ending. He would end up winning it back at WrestleMania 10 again against Yokozuna. He would beat him. And then he would lose it again after that to Diesel, I believe. Again, I'm going through his career. Anyway, regardless, he would win the title off and on again, right up until 1997. I think I'll get to that later, right before we get into these two fighting. In 1997, he took some time off, or 1996, and that's really where all this trouble started between Bret and Shawn. Shortly after their match at WrestleMania 12, he took time off, and this is really where their animosity started. So let's discuss Shawn's a little bit of Shawn's career, and then we'll get into how these two have collided and why this whole thing happened. Okay, so the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, started wrestling out of Texas, I believe when he was 18. I remember watching his documentary a while back. I never really paid too much attention to his career. Like his history, I never read his book, for example. I do, it's on my list of books to read. But I do know, yeah, he started his wrestling in Texas as a young man. He joined the AWA, again, as a really small wrestler in this world of giants of wrestlers. And he had a tag team partner, Marty Jannetty, and they were the Midnight Rockers tag team, a real ahead of its time high-flying tag team. They would come into the WWF in 1988, and they would be fired shortly after, because they live up to their name. They were the Midnight Rockers, because after events they would go and get hammered, they'd party, get arrested, etc., etc. They got into like a bar fight, if I remember correctly, and yeah, Vince fired them the next day. He brought them back a year later. They went back to the AWA, and they had some really good matches there. Those Rockers matches in AWA, they're bloody, I think. Played by Buddy Rhodes, and I can't remember, Buddy Rhodes, and I can't remember the other guy's name. That match, crazy. High spots, bleeding, everything. It's a great match. They got brought back into the WWF, and it didn't take them long, where they were winning world titles as well. Unfortunately, they never had a prominent match against the Hart Foundation because it was such a good style. Bret always talks about how Shawn and Bret's style was meant for each other. They complement each other's styles so well. The one time they had a match, it was on Saturday Night Main Event. The top rope broke in the ring, so they couldn't do any running spots. They couldn't do any high spots, couldn't do any top rope spots. So it was terrible. And Bret says he always regrets, that happened, because he thought for sure they were going to tear the house down and steal the show, kind of deal. I think the Midnight Rockers were supposed to win the world titles from the Hart Foundation at Saturday Night Main Event. I think they won it at like a house show or something shortly after. This is around the time they were looking to kind of disband the Hart Foundation and let Bret go his own way. But yeah, Shawn, again, much like Bret, eventually, he needed to break apart from his tag team partner because his charisma, his wrestling ability, he was a natural heel. Yeah, they wanted to separate and make him a singles character, or a singles wrestler, and, they had one of the most famous breakups in wrestling history, the infamous barbershop segment where Brutus was interviewing them and, asking whether or not they were going to stay as a tag team. And, Shawn and Marty Jannetty hugged it out and it was like, yeah, they're going to be together, forever. And then Shawn super kicks Jannetty, and then he throws him through a glass window on the stage of the barbershop. Brutus Beefcake's like little talk show that we would do in the middle of a show sometimes. What makes that even more comical, us wrestling fans remember, is Bobby Heenan's hilarious commentary. Because the whole time, they're talking about whether they're going to be together or not. he's making it sound like he knows everything. It's like, they're like, I don't know if we can, they're hinting that they're not, and he's like, oh, I knew, I know it, they're not meant to be together or whatever, they gotta go their own way. Then they were talking like, yeah, I think we're gonna be like, we're brothers, so we need to be together forever, and he's like, yeah, see, they need to be together always, they'll always be a tag team. And then when he super kicked, Jannetty, Bobby Heenan's like, oh, I knew he would do that. And then Sean threw Bobby through the glass, or Sean threw Jannetty through the glass, and Bobby says, look at Jannetty, that coward, he's trying to jump through the glass to get away from Sean. Classic heel commentating. Regardless, he became a singles wrestler after that with, I think, Sherry Martel was his first manager. Fun fact, the Shawn Michaels Sexy Boy theme music, that's Sherry Martel singing in it to start. That's her saying, oh, Sean. So yeah, she cornered him for a while, and then eventually he needed to get bodyguards. He ended up getting Diesel, Kevin Nash. They would come into the WWF and be his bodyguard. Sid Justice, or Psycho Sid, at one point was his bodyguard. He would win the Intercontinental title. Again, his career mirrors Brett's. The Intercontinental title, by the way, guys, in the WWF is like the step-up belt. It's the belt you get before you get the big shot at the world title, and it's traditionally for smaller wrestlers, not Ultimate Warrior, not counting Ultimate Warrior. So, yeah, he would win that title a couple times, I believe. It's funny, Brett would win his world title, his second world title at WrestleMania 10. Sean would lose his Intercontinental title at WrestleMania 10, but he had the best match at WrestleMania 10. He had that crazy ladder match at Razor Ramon. That was ahead of its time, and it really showed the world of wrestling fans what a ladder match is, and, every ladder match from that point on would use that as a reference and, step it up to the point where now it's just it's like stuntman Circus Lay shit now, and I'm crazy because that's a great match, and the opening match was Brett versus his brother Owen, and that was one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. So these two had a phenomenal WrestleMania 10. They actually wrestled each other around this time as well in 1992, I believe it was, at the Survivor Series when Brett was champion. It was World Champion versus Intercontinental Champion. They didn't even main event. I think Hogan was in the main event instead. But they had a little match, and it was decent. It wasn't the greatest. It's nothing like the WrestleMania 12 match, but they did have their match. Good guy versus bad guy, and of course Bret Hart came out on top. That was the way things worked back then. Not very often you'd have the heel win the world title. So now we're getting up to about WrestleMania 12, where I think I need to start talking about these two. Their paths are colliding, sort of deal. I will say with Shawn Michaels, when I'm going to talk about both these wrestlers, I liked both of these as kids. I really liked Shawn Michaels because he was always that little guy that he would always come out win on top. I never used to know his name when I was younger. I used to see the guy with the heart on his ass because he always had Heartbreak Kid on his ass. And I knew Bret as the pink and black wrestler. And my dad told me he was Canadian, so I automatically always loved Bret as a kid. Similar to Shawn Michaels, he was always smaller and he would come out on top. But for some reason, it always felt like he was a little more in control, whereas you knew he was good. But, he was a bad guy and he would always come out on top. He honestly reminds me of Chelsea Green today, the WWE wrestler. I think she's the United States champion right now. I always say they remind me of one another. That's a huge compliment to Chelsea Green. She's probably one of my favorite wrestlers, active wrestlers today. I don't watch wrestling, but I do keep track of it. And, yeah, the cat hair, sorry. She reminds me of Shawn in a lot of ways. I've mentioned this before to friends of mine. Because just like Shawn in the 90s, he's good, but he's an asshole, and, you want him to lose, but he always finds a way to win. He's got bodyguards, just like Chelsea has a bodyguard. He has spots where, not degrading, but embarrassing spots. Shawn's embarrassing spot, is they grab him by the shorts, and they pull his shorts down as they whip him around the ring, and you can see his ass crack, and he runs around with his ass crack hanging out. Chelsea can't do that, obviously, in today's, maybe during the Attitude Era, but in today's wrestling, there's no way they would ever do that to a woman on TV. But Chelsea's spot like that is she gets wedgied every now and then. The girls will wedgie her. And it always reminds me of like a spot that Shawn Michaels would take. And I do think she'll be a big superstar. She'll turn her face maybe eventually, just like Shawn did. But I always say, yeah, she reminds me of Shawn Michaels. And CM Punk's always reminded me of Bret Hart. Just the way he carries himself and everything. But anyway, we're getting into modern wrestling. I don't want to talk about that. We're going to talk about how these guys, their careers eventually collided and how they actually started out pretty cordial and pretty friendly with each other. Okay, so by the accounts of both men, they were friends up until, I want to say 96. And after WrestleMania 12, 96, I would say, there was tensions kind of there. We'll talk about what happened, but they were always friends. Bret used to say, and Shawn confirmed, he used to tell him during matches when he'd come back through the curtain, Bret and Shawn would be just in awe with the matches he would have. And Bret would tell Shawn, you know, that's going to be you one day. You're going to be taking over when I'm gone. They're not that far in age, but Bret seems he was miles more mature than Shawn, and he came from such a pedigree that he just garnered respect, so Shawn really looked up to him. And like I said, they were really friendly. I want to say around 95, 96, Shawn Michaels started to become a little bit more of a partier. I think maybe this is where his substance problems came in. Alcoholism, he was big on pills around that time. He started really aligning himself in a locker room with a number of individuals, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Paul Levesque, or Triple H, and Scott Wallman, the 1-2-3 Kid, and they called themselves the Clique. It was like their little group, and they were not liked from the rest of the locker room because they were always politicking with Vince McMahon in his ear, whispering, you know, we should do this, we should do that to benefit themselves and not everybody else. So Bret and the rest of the locker room, Undertaker, etc., you know, initially at first, about 95, 96, they weren't too concerned about them. They just kind of kept their eye on them. Because Bret was so respected by Vince, they had such a good relationship. Bret said it was like a father-son relationship is how he looked at it as. Bret wasn't ever concerned about Shawn getting picked over him for anything, or Shawn's, you know, in his ear would mean more than what Bret would say. So Bret wasn't too concerned, but it was very apparent these two were isolating themselves from the rest of the locker room. And this came to head when these two were scheduled to wrestle at WrestleMania 12 for the World Wrestling Federation Championship, which was almost a year and a half build-up for Shawn to win, as Bret has told in his book. Bret had all these title defenses, this great title win to win it, from Kevin Nash, Diesel at Survivor Series 95, another fucking 5-star match. A match I watched live, mind you, in 1995. I remember Bret went through a table. First time I ever seen that in my life. And as soon as that happened, me and my cousins were trying to make tables out of cardboard boxes, and we were wrestling and throwing each other onto these cardboard boxes, thinking we were Bret Hart. But that whole time Bret was reigning as champ, he always says he feels like slighted by it because the whole thing was just he was holding this belt for Shawn to win. They were really building up this boyhood dream character with Shawn. Shawn actually main evented WrestleMania 11, the worst WrestleMania of all time, as the heel facing the babyface champion Diesel. It was the whole storyline was it was his former bodyguard, and yeah, he lost. Diesel won. And I think the cool part about that was they both had valets, like sex icon valets of the 90s. I think he had Jenny McCarthy, and Diesel had Pam Anderson, I believe, and they were both their valets for that event. It was a shitty event. So he won the Royal Rumble that year, obviously, to get in there. He won the Royal Rumble again the next year in 1996 to earn his title shot against Bret Hart, and for WrestleMania 12. And obviously, Bret at this point had told Vince, he had been with the company at that point, I think, for 12 years or 13 years. He wanted some time off. At the time, the WWF schedules were almost 320 days, 300 and something crazy days a year. They only got like 20 days off an entire calendar year, these guys. So they were always on the road. It was impossible to keep families. They all had, like, for the most part, 90% of them, him included, they all had girlfriends promotions in other cities throughout the U.S. because they were always traveling. So he wanted to take some time off, well-earned time off, and Vince agreed. He also had his agent line him up to do some TV shows, most notably Lonesome Dove, which is filmed in Calgary. So he was going to take time off after losing the title to Shawn and give Shawn the chance to run as champion and see what happens with that. So they did. Hopefully it's not too loud. They did have their match at WrestleMania 12. There's the actual little ring. And it was a great, great match. Oh my goodness. The whole story set up for Bret to come back with a chip on his shoulder based on how it ended. So basically, the Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12, an Iron Man match in wrestling, is a 1 hour time limit. I think now they do 30 minutes because it's an hour's too long. And it's like a sports game, like a football game, hockey game, basketball game. Whichever wrestler lands the most pinfalls or submissions, basically the most victories in that time limit, they win. So it could be a score of 4-3, 4-1, 4-2. It's supposed to be like a test of endurance. And these two put on a hell of a show. It's one of the best matches of all time, in my opinion. If you like technical wrestling, a full hour they went. And the whole point of this ending of this match, which would have set up the perfect comeback for Bret, was they were to go the full 60 minutes without a pinfall and a draw. So Bret would leave the ring thinking, okay, I got a draw, I didn't beat him, I might have to try to beat him some other time in another match. So as Bret's leaving the match, the Commissioner K-Fab is like the part of the story, the storyline, not real life. Commissioner Gorilla Monsoon came out and called for an overtime. So the ending of the match, Bret had Shawn and a sharpshooter in a dying 10 seconds, and Shawn barely hang on, so he didn't have to submit at the 10-second mark. So Shawn was beaten, and Bret Hart was all the way down at the end of the aisle, basically, at the entranceway, and he was told, you gotta go back and you gotta finish this match. So Bret was pissed, he went back, he was already starting to recover, and Shawn ends up hitting Bret with the old super kick, and pinning Bret Hart, beating him, and Bret is supposed to leave the ring pissed off because he feels he got cheated, and Bret always says, when he beat Shawn, he was lingering in a ring, for their story to look like he was pissed off. And he said Shawn yelled at the referee, get him the fuck out of the ring. Because Shawn was like, get out of the ring, it's my moment kind of deal. So he felt really disrespected. So when he walked out pissed off, he was supposed to be pissed off anyway. He was actually really pissed off. So, Shawn would reign as champion. Until I believe Survivor Series of that year. Bret went off and made his movies. Bret came back, and Vince told him, we think we're going to put the title back on you, because this run with Shawn, it just isn't working right now. We got to look at this from a different angle. So, in the meantime, while Bret was gone, this is a huge part I should not leave out at all. Bret's contract expired, and they had no idea his contract had expired. So he was free to talk to other promotions, a la WCW, which at the moment in 1996 had their own Monday night show that would go head-to-head with Vince's Raw. And that's the start of the Monday Night Wars. It was called in wrestling lore, WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro. And the WWF was losing big time. I think they started losing from mid-96 until 98 anyway. It was 86 weeks I think they lost straight. So they were ready to pack it up. And on top of that, WCW had a billionaire's owner, which Vince wasn't at the time. He was not a billionaire yet. And he would poach WWF talent as soon as their contracts would expire. He would throw them a ton of money and they would go there. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall went there. He was able to buy them from Vince McMahon that same year in 96. He also got Hulk Hogan in 95. So, while he was off for that time period between March and November, he actually talked to WCW and they made him a monster deal. So, Vince McMahon actually, heard about it. So, he flew up to Calgary to offer Bret his own contract. He told Bret he couldn't match their offer, but he could give him it was a 3-year contract that WCW offered Bret. He told him, I would give you a 20-year contract, like a lifetime contract. I could pay you that money over 20 years, not over 3 years, and you'd be guaranteed an office job when you're done wrestling. And you'd have the very first Legends contract, which weren't a thing back then. Bret, being loyal that he is, the loyal soldier that he is, accepted it. And like I said, he always thought Vince was like a father figure, and Vince would always have his best interest at heart. So he did that, and one of the stipulations Bret had in his contract that his agent had him put in there was he would have 30-day control over his character. Like creative control, so he could say if he won or lost in the last 30 days when his contract expired. Or if they're going to terminate his contract, he had 30 days. That's what it was, the clause. If you terminate a contract, he gets creative control for the last 30 days. So he comes back at Survivor Series 96, the same one. Shawn would lose his title to Psycho Sid. He would have a match with Stone Cold Steve Austin. That whole storyline was set up while Bret was away. Bret actually pitched and got Stone Cold hired in the WWF. And they had a hell of a match, another 5-star match, Survivor Series 96, Stone Cold and Bret Hart. And that set up like Bret's return, like his comeback. He beat Stone Cold. Stone Cold at the time was like the rising contender in the WWF. So the plan was, tentatively at that moment when Bret came back to wrestle Stone Cold, he'd pitched the idea to Vince on how to have a 3-match long-term plan with him and Shawn. The second match would take place at WrestleMania 13. They would fight again. They're kissing there, I shouldn't do that. They would fight again, and Bret would beat Shawn. The match would end because Shawn would injure himself and Bret would pin him or put him in submission and he'd be injured. Bret would win the title. And Bret would go over and he would give Shawn the finger, not show sportsmanship, and he would become a bad guy. The fans would boo him, he'd become the good guy. And then somewhere down the line, probably Survivor Series, like 3 to 6 months down the line, they would wrestle again, third time, and Shawn would beat Bret in a classic heel versus face match, because the WrestleMania 12 match was a very rare face versus face match, two good guys. And then after that, Bret would shake Shawn's hand finally and say, okay, I respect you, you've beaten me 2 out of 3 times. And eventually they would join forces through tag teams, through mutual wars they would have with each other. They'd have each other's mutual respect and eventually become partners. Shawn hated that deal. He hated the idea of losing to Bret, because at this point he was slowly building up an animosity towards Bret. By Bret's reputation in the locker room, he would say years later he was jealous of it. And basically he wanted what Bret had, the respect of the wrestlers, and he just didn't, because of the way, at the time, like I said, substance abuse was getting bad, and his little clique group, which became smaller when Diesel and Razor left Shawn and Kevin. It was only him and Paul and then Sean Waldman, but Shawn would leave as well. So yeah, he wasn't very in favor with the locker room at this time. Not as bad as he would be in 97, 98, but he was getting there. So the plan was Shawn would win his world title back at the Royal Rumble in 1997, January. Bret would not win, Stone Cold would cheat in the Rumble and eliminate Bret, Undertaker, and Vader right after Bret Hart eliminated him, but the refs wouldn't see it, so he'd come back in, eliminate everybody. They'd announce him the winner. Bret would freak out at Vince McMahon at ringside, and an event called the Final Four would be set up for the February's In Your House pay-per-view, which Bret would win, and the winner of that would go on to fight Shawn Michaels for the world title at WrestleMania 13. That was the plan. Well, after Shawn won his title from Sid, at Royal Rumble, I think it was like 2 weeks later or something, he announced, he had a leg injury and that he'd lost his smile and he needed to take time off. So this infuriated Bret and the other wrestlers who knew about the plan, the long-term plans, because it was obvious he did not want to lose to Bret Hart. He didn't like that plan, their plan they had put together, so he lost his smile and took time off TV. So what happened was the Final Four, Bret would win the world title. The very next night, the Final Four was for the world title now, not a shot at the champion at WrestleMania. The winner would be the champion, and it turned out to be Sid. Because Bret would win the title, and the very next night on Raw, Stone Cold would screw Bret Hart of his title. because there was a title match between Bret and Sid the next night on Raw, and Sid would win the world title, and Sid and Undertaker would end up main eventing the WrestleMania 13. Now, Bret Hart, one of the big things to talk about how the Screwjob changed wrestling. I should mention how Bret Hart helped usher in the Attitude Era, there were sparks of the Attitude Era happening in 1997, and one of the big, huge first sparks was Bret Hart's match against Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. It is the best match of all time, in my opinion. It's my number one of all time of any matches. Because of the match itself, the drama in it, the storytelling, as well as the ending. That iconic image of Stone Cold bleeding while he's getting put in a sharpshooter, and he passes out. And Bret starts to attack him while he's passed out, officially turning heel bad guy. And Stone Cold becomes the good guy, because around this time, and in WWF, like I said, the Attitude Era was ushering in, because NWO was huge in WCW, and they were the bad guys that were cool. WWF was still under its old gimmicks at that point. Good guys were good guys, bad guys were bad guys. You cheered the good guys, you booed the bad guys. And the fans didn't like that, so they were really cheering Stone Cold and all these bad guys. And so, the good little soldier, pink and black soldier, wasn't going to cut it anymore, so they needed to flip it. He needed to be the bad guy, and Stone Cold needed to be the good guy at the end. So that's what Bret Hart did. I think it was the next week, Kayfabe got injured from Steve Austin because he needed to take some time off for his knee, but he turned his back on the American audience. He said he'd been screwed so much, and that, they boo him now after everything he's done, and then he became like a Canadian nationalist. This is how he became a Canadian hero, and this is how most kids, teenagers, men, like millennials, remember Bret Hart. He was the Canadian champion. He come out with the Canadian flag. He reunited with his brother-in-laws, and his brother Owen, Jim Neidhart, British Bulldog. Brian Pillman joined them at that point. They became the Hart Foundation stable, which is like a heel stable in the U.S. and a hero in Canada and everywhere else. So, yeah, that's how that came about, and that was all of 97, this faction, the Hart Foundation. Now, Shawn came back after WrestleMania 13 conveniently, and he started teaming with Triple H, his real clique friend in the back, and his girlfriend at the time, Chyna, and they became DX, basically a raunchier version of NWO with two men, a man and a woman. I think Rick Rude was with them for a while too at that point. He was like their manager, and Chyna was like their muscle. They became like a raunchier version of NWO, so it was really fun as a kid to watch wrestling around this time. You had the Hart Foundation, and you had DX, and DX would do such ludicrous, crazy things. It was a really magical time, you guys, if you are a wrestling fan around this time, because you would be switching channels back and forth between WCW Nitro and WWF Raw on Mondays. And, yeah, it'd be like, okay, well, who's wrestling on Nitro right now? Well, Norman Smiley versus Ernest the Cat Miller. I don't care about that. Let me go to WWF. Who's wrestling? Well, all of them. What do they call the Moshers? No, the Headbangers. Headbangers and the Godwins. Okay, I'll watch that because I like the Headbangers. So, you'd always switch back, and then NWO segment would be over. Switch to WWF, and the DX segment would be on, so you'd watch that, what kind of crazy shit they'd be up to. So at this point, the tensions with the clique in the back of the locker room were at an all-time high. They basically weren't talking to anybody else. They were arrogant to everybody. They would get their way when things would go with Vince. As far as Vince could be concerned, unless Bret or Undertaker would veto it. And they just stopped talking. There was a silent animosity between the two of them, where they both knew that they were talking shit about one another. They both didn't like each other. He didn't like how raunchy he was and the way he carried himself, because he was all Mr. Straight Lace. And at the time, Bret Hart was not liking the direction of the WWF, where it was going. He told Vince this. It wasn't wholesome for kids anymore. It was getting real reality TV. It was turning into what the full-on Attitude Era would become. This was the very beginnings. Bret Hart was at the very beginnings of the Attitude Era. And Shawn didn't like that because, Bret was like the stickler. He was the stiff, and they would have sit-down interviews years later, and they would talk about these and where these tensions came from. Well, it all came to head when Vince, had planned that these two are going to collide. At some point, they're going to have a match, so they got to start slowly selling the heat with these two. So they have them like cutting each other down in interviews, and Bret would come to Sean in the back and be like, you know what you should say about me? You should say, you know, my dad's so old, he's like dust in a book or something, you know, crazy like that. Or he went into a cemetery and they tried to keep him, you know. And Sean would be like, oh, that's great, that's funny, I'll go say that. And then Bret would come to Sean and be like, hey, I'm going to make fun of your Playgirl shoot or something, make you, you know, because this is the 90s again, guys, you know, making fun of gays and stuff like that. You know, that was kind of like the bully thing to do back then in the 90s, right? And Sean would be like, yeah, sure, you can insinuate I'm gay, whatever. And Bret would go do that. He'd come to the back and ask Sean, is that okay? And Sean would almost be in tears, you know, nodding like, so Bret knew he really hurt his feelings. And Bret would be like, what the hell, we talked about this. So it all came to head in Connecticut, a taping in Connecticut at Raw. Sean went out to the ring and he did an interview. And he brought up a rumored relationship Bret Hart had with the beautiful Sunny, the valet, Tammy Lynch or Cinch, whatever her name is. He was insinuating that Bret was sleeping with her, which was a huge no-no because Bret's a married man with kids at home. And he came out and said, Bret Hart, you've been enjoying your sunny days or something like that. And I guess Bret in the back was like, what the fuck did he just say? And Bulldog and all of them were like, what the hell? So he went to the back. He walked right past Bret, all pissed off, and didn't say anything to Bret. So Bret went into his locker room, grabbed him by the hair, and they had a hair-pulling fight. And it ended with, you know, they got broken up. It ended with Sean going into, you know, Vince's office and throwing down a piece of hair on a table that got pulled out of his head from Bret. And he said, I'm going home because this is not a safe work environment. So he went home for a couple months, or a month, I can't remember. He went home for a while. And, yeah, Bret Hart, he apologized. He had to apologize because Vince made them get together, and they had to apologize. And, you know, Bret told him, look, I respect you as a wrestler. I could work with you. I really like what your style and everything. And just so you know, like, I'm cool. And, you know, if I have to lose the world title to you, if Vince told me I have to lose the world title to you, I would have no problem with that. This is why Bret and the Screwjob happened. This is it. It had nothing to do with him being in Canada. It was this comment that Shawn Michaels made when Bret Hart said that in that meeting. You know, he said, I wouldn't mind, I would drop the title to you. And Shawn, you know, told him, well, that's great, but just know that I wouldn't do the same for you. And, you know, Bret was extremely shocked at the arrogance of this fucking guy. That he was like, you know what, I'm not going to drop the title of this guy. So if it comes up, I have to drop the title. I'm not happening. And it wasn't even a week or so later, Vince said, here's the deal. We are going to have you drop the title to Shawn at Survivor Series. Right around this time. I don't want to say a week before the event. Because, you know, Bret was telling Vince, that's not happening. We're not losing that title. At least something's got to give. Vince told Bret, I can't honor your contract. I'm too broke. I can't do it. So if you can get your same deal with WCW, you should probably take it. So he was absolutely devastated. All of this, you guys, is documented in the documentary Wrestling with Shadows, Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows, that just so happened to be filming Bret Hart for the year of 1997. And it captured all this just by chance, one of the most infamous moments in sports history. They documented all of it. So he told him, I can't honor it. So see if you can get your deal with WCW. So Bret called WCW and right away they were ecstatic. Yes, we'll take you, your same deal. I think it was $3 million a year for 3 years. We'll give you that deal. And I remember Shawn, or Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, because they recommended him, they would get a percentage of it. So they were super excited about Bret coming over. So Bret being devastated, you know, that his relationship with, you know, this father figure of his, he just basically told him, I can't afford you anymore. He joined WCW, so his last 30 days was the month of November for Survivor Series. Technically, it was the month of November going into December. I think December 22nd was the end of his contract. So, in that case, Bret did have creative control over his last 30 days. So Bret told Vince, I am not dropping the title to that piece of shit at Survivor Series. Especially in Canada, because at the time there was this whole Canada versus USA storyline where, Sean was like picking his nose with the Canada flag, making Canada jokes, all this stuff. It was all great, great TV. And Bret said, I'm not losing to this piece of shit in Canada. I'll lose to anybody else on your roster at Survivor Series, Undertaker, Stone Cold, anyone else. He almost insinuated he would lose to him anywhere but Canada. But as arrogant as he was, he didn't want to do that in Canada. He said it wouldn't happen. So he came up with a plan that he would vacate the title the next night. As a man in his late 30s now, I look back on this. Bret's pitch was, Vince, I'll walk away the next night of Raw, and I'm a bad guy, Canadian nationalist. I'll apologize to the fans, thank them for all their time in WWF, and I'll be on my merry way off to your promotion that's killing you and help them further kill you. There's no way that would have worked, Bret. Like, there's no way. I wouldn't, if I was the owner, I wouldn't allow that. That makes us as the owner look weak, and it makes our world title look weak. That, you left as champion, you gave it up, you vacated it, so there's no one better than you in our promotion now, and you're going off to fight in WCW. But, again, he volunteered. Another scenario was losing the world title to Undertaker or Austin the next night on Raw. But Vince is like, no, we can't do that. So he's like, well, what are we going to do? Because I'm not losing to him at Survivor Series. So they came up with the plan, and it's on audio, on Wrestling with Shadows, that they would figure something out the next night on Raw, whether he vacates it or loses the Taker or Austin. But what would happen at Survivor Series is these two would have a double disqualification. Basically, in the middle of the match, both factions, DX and our Foundation, would run out, have a big fight, the bell would ring. Right when both members landed their finishers and there's no referees. I think the deal was, if we go back and look at the match itself, it ended with Shawn putting Bret Hart in a sharpshooter while the referee was out, Earl Hebner. The way this was supposed to plan out is Bret's putting Shawn in a sharpshooter. He lets go of the or Shawn's putting Bret in a sharpshooter. Owen comes out, and or another referee comes out, and as Michaels is trying to wake up Earl Hebner, and Bret Hart hits him and gets him in a sharpshooter, while the DX runs out and hits Bret off of Shawn. Shawn gets up, or Bret gets up, and Shawn gets up, and Shawn super kicks Bret just as another referee's coming out. And that's when the Hart Foundation come out, and all of DX, and a big kerfuffle starts, and the match is over, the double bell ring. And no one wins, no one loses, double disqualification. That was the plan. Yeah, that's how it was supposed to work. Shawn was supposed to run out, or Owen was supposed to run out first, while Shawn was giving Bret the sharpshooter, and the referee was out right before the other referee came. And then a member of DX would come out, and then it would end up with Shawn hitting with a super kick, going for the pin, and then Hart Foundation would come to the rescue, and then there'd be a double disqualification. That was the plan. But, alas, that wasn't what happened, and what happened was known globally as the Montreal Screwjob, and it, like I said, it changed to wrestling from what wrestling is today, or into what wrestling is today. So the night before the event, Vince had a meeting with Shawn Michaels, and I believe it was Bruce Pritchard and Paul Levesque, and they devised a plan where Shawn would screw Bret out of the title, and basically the spot, or the part of the match, where Shawn puts Bret in his own sharpshooter, Earl Hebner, the referee, would ring the bell. Even though Bret's not going to submit, and Shawn would be named champion. Now Shawn's supposed to act angry and leave the arena, and he has to deny that he had anything to do with it. Otherwise, the rest of the locker room would refuse to work with Shawn ever again. Vince would take all the heat, and Vince would explain to his talent, I had to do this to keep us strong, because what he would have done would have further helped to ruin us and ruin your livelihoods, that's what he was going to pitch to the guys. So they devised this plan. Only the three of them knew, or four of them knew. So the morning of, according to Shawn Michaels in his book, apparently, he told Earl Hebner the plan, and Earl agreed with it. And in Wrestling with Shadows, they're kind of suspicious something like this could happen. Bret approaches Earl, and Earl swears on his kids that he would never do something like that to Bret because they're such good friends. So of course this does happen. Sean puts Bret in a sharpshooter, and Vince McMahon, who's at ringside randomly, screams, "Ring the fucking bell." They ring the bell. Sean acts angry. He leaves the ring, goes to the back. Now, when I was a kid and we watched this pay-per-view, we were all confused, and I'm like, because at this time, everybody knew Bret Hart was leaving. It was all over the news. He was going to WCW. This was his last match, is what everyone was thinking. But he's done. He's gone. It was announced a couple weeks beforehand that he'd signed with WCW. So, I thought it was all bullshit. It was a storyline. He actually isn't leaving then. Because they screwed him. I remember thinking to myself, like, what? He didn't submit. Oh, so he's going to be there on Raw then. So he actually was never leaving. This was all part of like a wrestling storyline. But no, it wasn't. It was very, very real. Bret Hart, of course, the infamous scene. He would go to the ringside, look at Vince McMahon and spit in his eye. And Shawn would run to the back. What I remember is, I don't remember the spitting in the eye. I don't remember Bret destroying anything. I think it ended with Shawn Michaels going through the back, and that was it. And it's, the logo came up 1997, Property Titans Sports, blah, blah, and that was it. So everybody, we were all watching, what the hell just happened? Like, how is it ending like that? Okay, I guess we'll find out on Raw. I guess Bret's going to be pissed, because obviously this is a part of the story. And it wasn't the next night. Vince had that black eye on Raw, and he was talking about how Bret screwed Bret. It slowly started coming out that, yeah, Bret Hart punched him after the show, and all this stuff had happened. And so, yeah, what happened after the show? Bret spit in his face. He signed on a camera, made the shape of WCW on the camera, and then he destroyed a bunch of monitors in the tables. He went to the back. He got ushered into the back from security. And I think the story is Undertaker was so livid at what happened. He went to see Bret, and he told him, "I'm going to go get that son of a bitch, Vince McMahon. He's going to have to explain himself." So Sean happened to be in Bret's locker room, and this is on Wrestling with Shadows too. And so Bret's in there. Bret's asking him, like, "You have anything to do with that?" And he's telling him, "No, I swear to God, it had nothing to do with that." I went to Vince's office. I gave him the belt. I'm like, "I don't want anything to do with this." And Bret's not buying it. He knows he's a part of it. In a hallway, Bret's wife is giving it to Triple H. She knows they're a part of it. He's denying it. And then, of course, you see Vince limping out of the office with a black eye. The guy had to pretend his camera was off, so he's holding it his side, but you can see it. But what had happened was Undertaker brought Vince to see Bret. He had to explain himself. Bret was in a shower, or ass naked when Vince walked in, and told him, "I'm going to shower when I get out of here. If you're still here, I'm going to knock you out." So he went and he had a shower, and I guess he had a real shower, like a 10-minute shower, washed his hair, everything else. He came back out, walked right past Vince. He went and got changed, and then he walked up to Vince, and they grabbed each other, and then Bret hit him with an uppercut. Vince fell back, and I believe Vince, Shane McMahon was in there too, and Gerald Briscoe, they all said the same thing. I believe that version. Bret figures when he uppercutted Vince, he fell and he sprained his ankle. No, when Gerald Briscoe was trying to break it up, as Vince fell from getting knocked out from Bret, he was stepping on Vince's foot, and it twisted his ankle as he fell, so he sprained Vince's ankle. Vince got up, groggy, and Bret walked up to him while he was getting picked up groggy, and he said, "Don't fucking screw me on my pay either." And then Vince, in a groggy state, was like, "No, I won't." And then he limped out, and that's when you seen him on the camera. So it was very, very real, a very, very real breakup. And, yeah, the next few weeks, it was just constantly DX making fun of Bret Hart, and became really evident that it was all personal stuff. Bret was not. It wasn't a part of any storyline. Bret was, I think he made his Nitro appearance 2 weeks later, and they announced he was going to be the referee at Starrcade for the year-long build-up of Sting versus Hollywood Hogan, the Crow Sting. Yeah, Bret Hart did nothing in WCW. It was a big mistake to go there. They didn't know what to do with him. Like I said, they could have built, like they say, like everybody, they could have built the whole show around him. He was such a huge star, but they didn't know what to do, and there was so much politicking there. Bret literally says he was just showing up for a paycheck at that point. Like, his passion for wrestling was pretty much gone because it was such a poorly run organization. Whereas what Bret Hart did, and now we're going to talk about this, how he ushered in the Attitude Era, which in turn saved the WWF, which in turn made it this empire that it is today. And how that wouldn't have happened if the Screwjob never happened. So Bret Hart leaving, right away all the fans knew that Vince McMahon had actually screwed over Bret Hart. Even the American fans, everybody knew it's all a story. Bret doesn't hate the U.S. He has a dual citizenship. He loves the U.S. It was part of his storyline. They knew that, and that Vince did that to him, a good guy. All the fans hated Vince, Americans and Canadians. They hated him for what he did. So that created the Mr. McMahon character, the bad guy, the bad boss. The Bret screwed Bret with his black eye, and the curtain was revealed, because at that point, the curtain was pulled back, rather. No one knew Bret or Vince McMahon was the owner of WWE. He always played the commentator, and nobody knew that. So he had to reveal, hey, I am the owner, and yes, I did this to Bret, but I did it because Bret screwed Bret. Now him being the bad guy, as Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was made during that Bret Hart match at WrestleMania 13, his popularity was still incredibly high and going higher. When he won the world title at WrestleMania 14, that following WrestleMania, or that coming up WrestleMania, I guess, 4 months later, his biggest rival was Vince McMahon, because he was booed every time he came into the ring, Vince McMahon. So Vince became this bad boss, like this evil boss, which people have. People can relate to it, an asshole boss. And Stone Cold was always fighting against him, and it became must-watch TV. It won the Monday Night Wars, and it eventually put WCW out of business, because nobody would watch anything but WWF to watch this Stone Cold storyline with Vince McMahon. None of that would have happened without the Screwjob, if everything went the way Bret wanted. Whether he stayed in WWF or I could never see Bret Hart in the Attitude Era, though. That would have been way too raunchy for him. But if he would have had his way and he would have just left and, lost to Taker, for example, the next night, Vince would have been a bad guy. So when Stone Cold was an asshole to him, there wouldn't have even been a storyline. Vince still would have been hidden as the owner, you know what I mean? So all this, fire they caught for that, none of it would have happened. So, it's debatable. You go, well, would Stone Cold become the biggest star of all time? Without that, I don't know. He would have become a star for sure, I think. But who knows? But yeah, it definitely, set the course for the Attitude Era. And like I said, the empire that the WWF built, a lot of it was won during the Monday Night Wars, and it was won during the Attitude Era, which was a phenomenal time to be a fan and to support you guys. But yeah, Shawn would actually get hurt 2 months later. In Royal Rumble 98, he would injure his back, a disc, in a casket match with Taker. He wouldn't wrestle again until WrestleMania 14 against Stone Cold, where he was so bad in substances, so doped up and everything, and no one liked him. They didn't even know he would drop the title of Stone Cold. He was told to, and he was insinuating that he wasn't going to do it. So much so that The Undertaker was waiting at the back, standing at the door at the entrance, because he's like, no, you're giving this title to Stone Cold. And, Taker said at this point, so if Stone Cold hit him in a stunner and, Michaels wouldn't get pinned, he would kick out at 2. Undertaker was going to come out there and stand at ringside and make sure, Michaels lost, kind of deal. Because, Michaels was terrified of him. So that's what would happen, and he would be out of active competition until 2002. He'd make a comeback, he'd become a born-again Christian, and his back would be, healed. But in the meantime, he was, on screen as, a commissioner and everything, and I guess Vince let him go, sent him home at one point, because he was so, drugged out on the job. In Vince's office, he was passed out. Bret Hart would go on to WCW, and again, they wouldn't know what to do with him. They would put the world title on him right at the very end of his career there. In Starrcade 99, which is December. That's the December pay-per-view in WCW. He would wrestle Bill Goldberg, and Bill Goldberg would give him a sidekick to the head. Bill Goldberg was infamous for injuring every wrestler he worked with. He was basically a bodybuilder, a football player that they made a wrestler, and he didn't have any, wrestling ability, I guess. He didn't know how to control himself, basically. And he kicked Bret Hart in the head, and he ended his career. He cracked his skull, and it led to all sorts of complications, including Bret's convinced it led to a stroke that happened 3 years later. Bret Hart suffered a stroke. Eventually, Brett and Vince reconciled. While Brett had that stroke. In the meantime, his brother Owen died in 1999 in the ring in WWF. He fell from the ceiling during an entrance. So that was another huge thorn in Brett's side when it came to WWF. Like, they screwed him over and then they killed his brother. So he made peace with Vince while he was recovering from his stroke. Vince agreed, I'll give you your library, make a DVD about you, and then I'll put you in the Hall of Fame. And so Brett got put in the Hall of Fame in 2006. He came back as an on-screen personality in 2010, where they did a storyline where he wrestled Vince McMahon, like the I Screwed You Over storyline. Like, they played it out in the ring, and they had a match, like a street fight match, WrestleMania 26, I believe it was. And it was a cheap match because Brett couldn't do much. He couldn't risk hurting his neck. His neck injury was so bad that he could die, so he never did wrestle again. And it's one of the reasons why he hates Bill Goldberg. It's like a meme. He fucking hates Bill Goldberg. You think he never liked Vince and Shawn. It doesn't compare to how much he hates Bill Goldberg. Like, it's funny. But I mean, you look at Brett and everything he's gone through in his career, getting the screw job, everything that's happened to his family, all of those Hart Foundation members except for Brett are dead. Every single one of them. Jim Neidhart, British Bulldog, Brian Pillman, they're all dead. He's the last one. He's the last wolf, as he said in his book, and it's true and it's sad. All of his friends, Mr. Perfect, Rick Rude, all these people from back in the day that he was close to, they're all gone. So he has no one to share these memories and have beers with. Everyone's like, oh, he comes off bitter. I'm like, well, wouldn't you fucking be bitter? Like, you're never just one day gonna be like, okay, well, suddenly I like Bill Goldberg now. No, if everyone's gonna, what do you think about Bill Goldberg? Be like, fuck that guy. Wait, what about Bill Goldberg? What about Bill Goldberg? Is he a good wrestler? No, he's not a fucking, you know what I mean? Like, you're never gonna get him to say something nice about him. He does not like him. So, just recently, like as of last week, Bret Hart made an insinuation during one of his interviews. He does tours every other year. He goes and does a big tour and Q&As with fans and interviewers, live Q&As. And in one, he said, when Shawn Michaels lost his smile and quit, Vince was tearing up in the ring with Shawn. And he said Vince, or Bret, and a bunch of wrestlers at the time, and I heard this for years, Jim Cornette even brought this up recently, they've always were suspicious that Bret and Shawn were sleeping together. And Shawn and Vince were sleeping together, and that's why, Shawn had so much sway with, Vince McMahon, because he was sleeping with him. It seems a bit ludicrous for sure, but, in this crazy world of wrestling and finding out what a degenerate Vince McMahon, actually was, could he have done that to one of his talents? Another wrestler had accused him of doing it once upon a time. Male wrestler as well as a referee, a female referee. So is it possible, he took advantage of this guy while he was going through his substance problems. It's possible for sure. A little far-fetched, I don't think I would believe it, but it was funny that just came out last week. Brett brought that up. But yeah, I hope I didn't forget anything, guys. Like I said, that was the Montreal Screwjob from an actual wrestling fan, a wrestling person that, has the memory of an elephant. I didn't read anything for this, guys. This was all off my memory. Because I watched it and I've, read about it and seen documentaries about it and everything else over the years. Like I said, it's a huge moment in sports history. So, with that being said, guys, though, I think that's going to be it for this video. It's a nice long video for you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. With that being said, everyone have a great day, great night, whatever it may be, and peace out. Sweet Jen music, always down. Yeah, do the album from the top. Boom. I was gonna put him in a sharpshooter. Oh my god, he's in a sharpshooter.